when my manager leaned back in her chair and said, "This source code belongs to us." Sweetheart, something inside me finally went silent. Not angry, not scared, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes right before a bridge gives way under its own weight. Carly Dennison's voice sharpened as she lifted her phone. "I am calling Victor right now. This ends today." She did not look at me when she said it. She never looked at me unless she wanted an audience for her power. She tapped the screen and forced a bright tone into her voice. "Hi, Victor? Yes, I need to escalate a termination immediately. She is refusing to cooperate, and her code is a liability." I kept my hands folded. My name is Julia Mercer, and for years I have held the guts of this company together. The strange thing was how easy it felt to sit there and let Carly talk. Her certainty worked like a curtain she was pulling over her own head. Victor's voice came through the speaker, muffled but firm. "Is she in the room?" Carly smirked. "Yes, I need approval to proceed." I finally reached into my bag. No hurry, no tremor. A thin folder slid out, its edges worn from years of being ignored. I set it on the table and nudged it toward her. Carly frowned, irritated by the interruption. "Hold on," I said. "Read this first." She opened her mouth to protest, but her phone vibrated before she could speak. Victor was calling me directly. She blinked at the caller ID, confused, as if the universe had gotten its wires crossed. I answered, "Hello, sir. What is going on?" "Carly said you're refusing directives." "Sir." "Nothing happened here," I said quietly. "But you should read what she's holding." Silence. Pure, heavy silence. Carly slowly flipped the folder open, and her face drained as she saw the first page. She looked at me, then not with superiority, not with confidence, but with something close to fear. She did not know it yet, but the ground had shifted. 3 weeks earlier, the first crack had already begun to form. 3 weeks before that meeting, I was already disappearing from my own job. It happened slowly, like someone dimming a light without telling me they had their hand on the switch. I was in the break room making terrible coffee when Mason, one of the junior developers, wandered in. He paused when he saw me, then gave a small, awkward wave. "Hey, Julia." I didn't know if you were still on the supply chain project." "I built the supply chain project," I said. The words came out softer than I meant. Not defensive, just tired. "But no one really asks me anymore." He winced. "Right. Sorry. I didn't mean it's fine." I told him, "What do you need?" "Well," he said, lowering his voice. "Carly asked me to rewrite part of the authentication service. She said it's legacy stuff. Thought I should check with you before breaking anything." I exhaled. That service handles millions of requests an hour. You cannot just rip into it. Tell her that. "I did," he whispered, "and she said you overreact to simple changes." That one hurt more than it should have. I had been a reliability engineer for more than 10 years, starting in San Antonio before moving to Austin for work. I had kept this system alive through storms that knocked out half the state, through peak seasons where the platform carried more transactions than anyone believed it could. I had patched outages at 2 in the morning while executives slept. And yet, lately, people struggled to remember I existed. During planning meetings, my name wasn't on the invite list. During stand-ups, Carly would skip me entirely. "Nothing from Julia," she would say, without even glancing in my direction. The worst part was how quickly everyone accepted it, as if I had always been part of the furniture useful when needed, invisible the rest of the time. One afternoon, after she dismissed me mid-sentence, I walked back to my desk and stared at my monitor, wondering how a person who held the architecture together could be pushed out of the room so easily. How did someone as essential as me end up treated like I had never mattered at all? Carly Dennison walked into the Austin office wearing ambition like armor. She moved fast, introduced herself loudly, and made sure every conversation circled back to the phrase strategic innovation. I watched her from the conference table as she clicked through a deck she had clearly practiced in front of a mirror. "This architecture," she announced, pointing at a diagram I had handwritten years ago, "is basically prehistoric scaffolding. It works, but only because someone glued it together in a hurry. I set my pen down. That scaffolding handles millions of transactions a day without failing." She smiled in the way people do when they have already decided you are wrong. "Right. But we cannot scale with duct tape. We need a modern vision." After the meeting, she stopped me in the hallway. "Julia, I need your authentication module documentation." "You have it." I said, "It's in the shared drive." She laughed. "It is incomplete. Or maybe you just like hoarding knowledge. Hard to tell." I felt heat climb my neck. "It is complete. You are misunderstanding how the protocol works. Mason also said you shut him down," she replied, crossing her arms. "You cannot keep blocking younger engineers. It is not a good look." The shift in tone was deliberate, a small, quiet threat. Later that afternoon, I found Mason at his desk. "Did you tell her I blocked you?" He shook his head quickly. "No. She asked me why your module was so dense. I said it was complex. That was all." "I see." He leaned closer. "Julia, someone from HR asked me if I have concerns about your collaboration skills. I did not say anything, but it sounded like they were already writing something." A cold prickle moved up my spine. Performance files. That was what she was building. A foundation for my removal. Brick by brick, I went back to my desk and opened my terminal, pretending to work while every muscle in my body tightened. Carly had just arrived, and she was already rewriting the story around me. Why would she target the only engineer keeping her grand vision from collapsing? The first sign something was wrong was the silence. My calendar, normally crowded with planning sessions and review calls, started to thin out. One invite vanished, then another. By the end of the week, I had only 2 meetings left, and both were ones I had created myself. I approached Carly's desk. "Do you know why I am not on the sprint planning list?" She did not look up from her laptop. "We are restructuring workflow. No worries. Julia, you will get the updates when they are relevant." "When they are relevant," I repeated. "That is right," she said, already waving me off. "Oh, and I assigned Mason to shadow you. He needs to understand your modules." Mason appeared behind her, looking like he wished he had taken a sick day. "Julia, I swear, I did not ask for this." "It is fine," I told him, even though my stomach tightened. "Come by after lunch." When he arrived at my desk, he looked miserable. "I should tell you something. Carly said she is calling the VP next week. She said your code is a liability." I froze. She said it is outdated, hard to maintain. She said she is preparing a corrective plan. I think she means a termination plan. I sat back slowly. "Thank you for telling me." He lowered his voice. "I think she wants me to replace parts of your design. She keeps rewriting diagrams and telling me to modernize them. Some of the changes do not even make sense. I already knew. On the shared whiteboard, half of my architecture had been replaced with buzzwords and arrows that connected nothing to anything. She was dismantling me in plain sight. I closed my laptop. The company covered my mother's medical insurance. Losing this job would break more than my pride. Carly controlled the meetings, the narrative, the proximity to leadership, at least on the surface. But there had to be something she did not know. The answer to everything was hiding in a drawer I had not opened in years. I sat on the floor of my apartment, the hum of the old air conditioner filling the silence, and pulled out the small fireproof box I kept tucked behind stacked folders and tax records. Inside was a thin manila folder. My handwriting on the tab read, "Mercer Logic Contract Year 1. I had almost forgotten it existed. I opened it carefully. The first page still smelled faintly of printer ink. I whispered the words as I read them. Intellectual property retained by contractor. License renewal required every quarter. My throat tightened. I flipped to the signatures mine on the left, the founders on the right. Back then, the company had been a fragile startup, barely held together with hope and late-night takeout. They could not afford to hire me full-time, so we did it this way: my architecture, my code base, licensed through my LLC. Mercer Logic. I turned to the next page. Failure to remit payment constitutes breach of license. My pulse started to steady. I walked to my laptop and logged into the Mercer Logic business account. The numbers loaded slowly, as if the system understood the moment better than I did. No quarterly payment. Not last month, not the month before. 6 weeks. That was how long it had been since the company had renewed anything. 6 weeks of unlicensed usage on a system handling millions of transactions a day. I called the new finance director the next morning. "Do you have a record of the Mercer Logic payments?" She answered briskly. "We canceled redundant vendor expenses." If Mercer Logic was one of them, that decision was final. My voice stayed calm. "You canceled the license for the supply chain platform." She hesitated. "If that is true, it will be reviewed." I hung up before she could ask more. My fear did not vanish, but something colder and clearer settled in its place. They had forgotten to pay for the very thing they were trying to take from me. If the company was already in violation, the next person who learned the truth could change everything depending on whose hands it landed in. I did not need revenge. I needed the contract to do its job. Every clause was a safety net someone smarter than me had insisted on when Mercer Logic was nothing but a laptop and a folding table in my San Antonio apartment. I reread the breach pages late into the night. Unauthorized modification. The contract said, non-payment. Together. They triggered immediate termination of the license. No grace period, no negotiation, no exceptions. By the time I got to the office the next morning, my decision was already made. Carly cornered me near the elevator. "We missed another deployment window. Julia, the team says you slowed everything down." I was not asked to review the deployment. I said, "That is the problem," she snapped. "You do not participate unless it benefits you." Her voice rose just enough for nearby engineers to hear. That was the goal. Humiliate first, justify later. I stepped around her without responding. When I reached the conference room, I heard her voice through the doorway. "This is what we inherited from Julia," she was saying. "Look at these bottlenecks. This is why our platform is fragile." She clicked to a slide showing a diagram that looked nothing like my actual architecture arrows pointing in impossible directions. Modules mislabeled, data flows intentionally distorted. Mason sat in the back, red-faced. I took a seat next to him. He whispered, "She made those slides last night. She did not let me correct them." "It is fine," I murmured. Though every muscle in my jaw ached, I spent the rest of the day documenting everything. Every false claim, every diagram, every accusation. I stored it all in a private drive, separate from the company network. That evening, I logged into the Mercer Logic server and enabled a strict automated license check. If they breached again, the system would know before I did. Carly thought she was preparing her final strike. She had no idea what happened when someone tried to fire a person whose contract held more power than the entire department. I came into the Monday meeting knowing Carly was ready to end my career. She was already seated at the table with a folder of her own, one she kept tapping as if it were a weapon. HR sat beside her, hands folded too neatly, avoiding my eyes. "Julia," Carly began, her tone sweetened with the confidence of someone who believed she had already won. "We need to address your ongoing performance concerns." I took my seat. I was not informed of any concerns. "That is part of the problem," she said. "You do not recognize the damage your outdated methods are causing." She slid a paper across the table. "Your code has become dangerous legacy material." I kept my voice steady. "That code handles millions of live operations." "Exactly," she said, smiling like she was doing me a favor. Then she leaned back in her chair, eyes shining with triumph. This source code belongs to us, sweetheart, and it is time we take control of it. HR shifted uncomfortably, but Carly lifted her phone before anyone else could speak. I am calling Victor now. He should approve this. She placed the call on speaker. Hi, Victor. I recommend immediate termination. Julia's behavior has become a liability. For a moment, the humiliation pressed against my ribs like a fist, but I breathed through it. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thin folder I had carried for weeks. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady. Hold on, I said, sliding it across the table, and read this first. Carly frowned but flipped it open anyway. Her expression faltered. She checked the signature line twice, then 3 times, her face draining as the meaning settled in. Victor's voice crackled through the speaker. Carly, what is happening? No one answered. HR's eyes were wide, fixed on the document. Carly finally looked at me, and for the first time, she did not seem sure of her footing. How fast could a firing flip into a crisis when the wrong person read the right contract? When my phone rang, I knew Carly's world had just collapsed. Her eyes were still locked on the contract, her mouth slightly open. When I answered the call, Julia, Victor said, his voice sharp with urgency. Is this real? I kept my tone even. Sir, nothing happened here, unless you count 6 weeks of unlicensed use. In the silence that followed, HR's face drained of color. The woman beside Carly leaned in to look at the contract again, her hand trembling as she traced the renewal dates. Victor exhaled. 6 weeks. Why was this not escalated? I was removed from most of my responsibilities. I said, no one asked me about the license. No one asked me anything. Carly snapped out of her shock. This is outdated paperwork. We own the code. She was paid as an employee. I met her eyes. Page 3. Intellectual property retained by contractor through Mercer Logic. My signature. The founder's signature. No transfer ever occurred. HR flipped the page, whispering under her breath. Oh no, this is binding. Carly shook her head violently. This is not valid. She probably put this together last night. Before I could respond, Mason stepped forward from the doorway. I had not even realized he had been standing there. I saw the contract last week. He said quietly, the dates are real. It predates all of us. Carly spun toward him. You do not understand what you are talking about. He did not back down. I understand enough. Victor's voice cut through the tension. Julia, stay where you are. HR, remove Carly from this meeting until legal reviews this. What? No, Carly said, her voice cracking as HR touched her arm. She is lying. She is manipulating all of you. I watched her struggle, but I felt nothing sharp, no anger, no triumph, just a steady calm that came from finally being heard. Julia, Victor said, legal will call you shortly. Do not leave the building. I stood, gathering my things. Every eye in the room followed me now, not with dismissal, but with need. What I wanted next would determine everything. They offered me everything I had once wanted far too late. Legal called me into a small conference room where Victor, the finance director, and 2 attorneys were already waiting. Papers were spread across the table, untouched. As if no one trusted themselves to make the first move, Victor cleared his throat. Julia, we are prepared to compensate you for the lapse. We can increase the licensing rate significantly. Or, he added carefully, we could discuss a full buyout of the intellectual property. The finance director jumped in. We can authorize a package in the range of several $100,000, plus a transition bonus. I sat down slowly. I am not selling the code, and I am not giving the company ownership. The attorneys exchanged looks. Victor leaned forward. What do you want? I want the agreement restored. I said, long-term, automatic renewals, full back pay for every missed quarter. I tapped the contract, and I want autonomy. I will not report to any manager. Not again. The room went quiet. The finance director finally nodded. We can structure that. A direct vendor relationship, high retainer, and no managerial oversight. You would operate independently. That is acceptable, I said. Just as they began drafting terms, an executive assistant stepped in and whispered something to Victor. His expression darkened. The board convened early. He told us. They reviewed the internal investigation. I waited. He folded his hands. Carly has been permanently removed. She is barred from managing technical teams across all company subsidiaries. Effective immediately. The attorneys said nothing. The finance director signed the first page of the new agreement without looking up. It felt less like a negotiation and more like the company finally admitting what it had tried so hard to bury. When they handed the papers to me for my signature, the weight in the room shifted. I was no longer someone they could cut loose. I was someone they needed. What justice looked like now was no longer a question. It was a choice I would have to define for myself. People think victory feels loud. For me, it was quiet. It was the kind of quiet that settles in once the shouting stops and the door finally closes behind you. After signing the new agreement, I walked back to my apartment in Austin and pinned the original contract on my wall. The paper was old, the ink slightly faded, but the words still carried the strength that had saved me. A week later, Mason stopped by my desk before heading home. "Thank you," he said. "If you had been fired, the rest of us would have been blamed for everything. And you taught me to protect my work." I started reading my own contracts. I smiled at him. "Good. Do not let anyone tell you your work belongs to them just because they say so." Carly, meanwhile, tried to find a new job. I knew because recruiters in Austin talked to each other. Every position she applied for flagged the internal investigation notes. Pattern of misrepresentation. The report said, unreliable managerial judgment. Each rejection pushed her further from the world she had tried to dominate. Months passed. My days settled into something steady: consulting calls, system reviews, and work that finally respected the boundaries I had drawn. Then an email arrived from the Austin Technical Ethics Committee. The subject line read, "Request for expert participation." During the meeting, the chair leaned forward. "We need someone who understands intellectual property misuse. Your situation qualifies you uniquely." He slid a file toward me. "Our first audit is a logistics startup accused of misrepresenting code ownership." I flipped open the folder. Carly's name was listed in the leadership section. I closed it calmly. "I will review the facts." I said, no anger, no desire to wound, just truth. In the months that followed, I became the person others came to for clarity, not the woman who almost got fired, but the woman who owned the system she built, and the knowledge to defend it. If the world kept underestimating women like me, then the systems we built would keep finding their way back to the hands of the ones who wrote them, not the ones who mocked them.